to Assessment in Focus, the podcast where we invite guests to tell us the real stories of digital assessment transformation, innovation and enhancement. Flexible assessment with integrity is a shared goal between higher education and Inspera, so we're here to discover how institutions around the world are assessing today and beyond. I'm your host, Ishan Global Client Evangelist at Inspera, and today I'm joined by Michael Sawyer and Dr Linda Amrane-cooper from the University of London. Linda is Director of Academic Practice in Distance Education at the University of London and is responsible for the work of the Centre for Online and Distance Education. Linda leads a team of 44 fellows who are thought and practice leaders in online and distance education. Mike has worked within higher education for over 20 years and across a variety of operational areas, including quality assurance, governance, and stakeholder relationship management. His first love, though, is the high wire act of delivering high stakes assessments, and he's been at the forefront of the University of London's delivery of digital assessment from the pandemic and beyond. Mike, Linda, thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
Now, the University of London, I think, is one of the world's best known names in higher education. I am so old that my degree, my certificate, is from the University of London. I went to Queen Mary's, but it was when the University of London did the certificate. So on the wall over there is a University of London certificate. I'm therefore delighted to have both of you on the podcast from that perspective. But Linda, I wonder if you could just bring that to the present day and just give us a little pen profile of the university today, please.
Sure. Well, congratulations for achieving a University of London award. It's fantastic to have you as an alumni from the university. So the University of London has a long history, set up in the mid-18th century by Queen Victoria, and we are a federation of 17 organisations, including Queen Mary, University of London, King's College, UCL, etc. A really, really fantastic group of universities and organisations working together. And overall, we have about 250,000 students in London attending institutions that are part of the University of London Federation. We also have about 40,000 students attending the University of London at a distance and online. So those students are located in approximately 190 countries. And actually the University of London has been a real pioneer of access and affordability for students around the world. We were the first university in the UK to offer degrees to women. And we started distance education about 160 years ago with some exams in Malawi. We've continued with that, but we now use modern technology to deliver our assessments as well as our whole learning experience. And we work with a lot of teaching centres around the world. So it's a great opportunity to really understand how higher education, and an important part of higher education, which is assessment, can be effectively and efficiently and meaningfully delivered to students across the world. And it's great to work with Inspera on that.
Thank you. We're delighted to work with you, and we're going to delve into this as we go through the questions. But over the last 3 or 4 years, I think there was a meeting at which Mike and I were trying to work out whether it's right that there's a student in every time zone in the world who's taken a LLB distance exam on Inspera at some point. We're fairly sure that that's right, but probably should do a little bit more digging to get all of them, because I'd love to get them on a map. Speaking of which, when I was a student, my party trick was I could name all the institutions in the University of London. I should still get out more, I'm sure. Moving on to those questions then. So, as higher education evolves, and I think that is a word that's particularly prescient today, as we see all the changes that are taking place, but as it evolves, what do you see as the most critical changes needed in assessment practices in particular to better align with the skills students need in the future? Linda, can I come to you first on that one?
Sure, yes. I think we've got to recognise that the workplace and the circumstances and the context that our students work in. So one of the obvious and important skills that students need is to be digitally literate. Sorry, these are new teeth. So if we think about delivering assessment, we want the mode of assessment to be relevant to that environment. So working on a computer, working with digital contexts, thinking about digital items that are relevant to assessment. I think that's all very important. We're also thinking about the way in which students are developing their skills for their workplace, and in fact many of our students are already in work and are looking to upskill or to enhance their ability in their settings. So things like communication skills, synthesis and analysis are right at the top of the list. Those critical learning skills and critical abilities. So we're moving away from reproduction of knowledge, very much towards thinking about how can students apply knowledge, how can they apply their skills, and how can they develop the types of behaviours that will be valuable in their future lives. So assessment has to deliver on all of those things. It needs to be authentic, it needs to be relevant to the subject they're studying, to the profession around that subject. And I think it's really important to think about how we continue to incorporate some of the new challenges like AI, and I suspect we're going to go on and talk about AI as we move forward. Mike, I don't know if there was anything you wanted to add to that, because we did talk more yesterday about this.
We did, yeah. No, I think you've covered most of the points we talked about. I think it's certainly true, certainly in our context, and the education we deliver at a distance, and we work with a lot of local institutions to do that. And it's always been true of our model that we sort of try and cater for a lot of different learning styles. You know, there are just ways of educating in certain parts of the world that are necessarily different to our own, and they come from different sort of learning traditions. And we've always tried to sort of work with that and lean into that and work with the students where they're at. But it does feel like we're at a sort of critical point where the tools that we're using will be applicable to everyone, regardless of where you are in the world, and your ability to use those and understand those and be at the forefront of using those is going to be really important for everyone. Not just in the UK or so yeah. I think it'll be interesting as we continue to deliver our education in the future, how we accustom ourselves to that and get students used to that.
I agree. The point about digital literacy, we know that assessment is a place where we can test their literacy or reinforce their literacy. Linda, thinking sort of outside of the assessment part of their student journey, how else should we in education be helping students to become more digitally literate in those skills that are relevant not only to their education but to what comes after?
I mean, it's critical that students have literacies of all kinds, and that's not just digital literacies. It's a whole variety of information seeking literacy is so important. So students know where can they go to get robust, authentic, proper information, and how can they manage that information, and key things about data protection and protecting their own information is so important, particularly in relation to AI. So I think a whole raft of important skills that perhaps 20 years ago we weren't thinking in quite the same way. And I think the point that Mike picked up on about working, the privilege that we have at the University of London is to genuinely be working with students in 190 locations, which means that you're really encountering the globe. you're encountering those global experiences. But beyond assessment, what we want to make sure is that our students are able to have a voice, that their voice is heard within our provision, but also that they're able to articulate their own perspectives and engage with their own perspectives, and engage with some important issues around, geopolitics, for example, and providing them with a platform, whether that's a digital platform practically, but also a space in which they can engage in some of those conversations, it is going to be really important, I think, as we move forward. So allowing a diversity of voices to articulate and to debate and develop their ideas and their perspectives, and understanding of a much wider world. So some of the important aspects include things like which information are we taking? Is it the global north, or should we be looking at global south perspectives as well on some of these main issues? Mm-hmm. So that's part of what we're exploring.
And that sounds, as you say, that's relevant to the context of the university being global, and a perspective I know that listeners in various parts of the globe are going to appreciate. I wonder that assessment, actually, it's a privileged place in many different aspects, but in terms of driving that digital literacy, I know that I wrote a non-assessed module when I taught on the bar course, which was aimed at expanding the skills around being a barrister, but the fact that it was not assessed impeded the level of engagement people had with it. By making these digital literacy skills part of the assessment, whether overtly or simply there as part of the wider assessment itself, really is driving, I'm sure, people's uptake of realising that there is a thread to this and a need to have it. I'm going to move on to a slightly different topic, and it's one where I'm really interested in the two different perspectives that you bring from Linda, your academic perspective of this in particular, Michael, yours from the operational perspective, although I know that there's a bleed over in the two. But I'm going to ask you the question each and hear from the perspective that you've done this. In your experience, what is the most significant barrier to digital transformation in higher education assessment, and how can institutions overcome it? And before I come to you, I'm going to say that one of the things that we hear most from prospective institutions that we're thinking of working with is, how's everyone else done this? And they're hearing the common challenges, hearing the way in which people overcame them, and sometimes hearing that there's no magic answer, it's just a lot of work, I think is really important. So, Michael, I'm going to turn to you first from that sort of operational aspect of it. What's the most significant barrier, or two or three if you want to come up with more?
I think that there is a sort of an obvious answer, which is possibly around infrastructure, the quality of the digital services that students are able to access on a daily basis, but particularly in my world, for the 2 hours they need to be online for that exam on that day without power cuts or the internet breaking down or anything like that. So that is just a daily challenge that you might expect in some parts of the world. I think another challenge that is perhaps a little more surprising actually relates to the point we were just talking about learning styles and about how locally education is approached, and it doesn't always follow that we teach a broad range of people from older sort of mature workers to right through down to sort of 18-year-olds, and it doesn't necessarily follow that the youngsters coming up are all on computers and can easily navigate that world. They really don't. It's often at the older end of the scale where the likes of us who are using them every day in all sorts of capacities and are familiarity, and if you said to us it's an online exam tomorrow, we probably wouldn't worry too much about that. That isn't true. Actually, the sort of, as you go down the generations, it isn't necessarily true. It doesn't always follow the logic that you think it will. So I think getting everyone up to speed and everyone to that level of comfort where it doesn't feel scary or sort of the things kids worry about, can I type quickly enough? Will my work just disappear? The sort of things you and I know won't happen, and it isn't a worry. They do worry about those things. And so, yeah, it's sort of bridging that gap, getting everyone familiar with.
I think I reached a particular parenting goal recently when my 18-year-old complimented me on my Excel skills, which I was very proud of. I was helping them create a revision timetable for their A-levels. So, but I agree, and that level of student comfort in just letting them see what it looks like and the environment. And I know that it's a conversation you and I had some years ago, which is, I think the best practice exam online is one that doesn't relate to their subject. See how consistent I am. I used to tell people, make it about cheese, because as the further it is from their subject, the more they're going to concentrate on the comfort of the environment, and giving them that information and videos and text in different ways, just letting them feel comfortable, so that the almost the necessary stress is on doing well in the exam itself and not any of the external factors, which I think is a nice segue, Linda, to come to you from the academic and the operational perspective, but from what you've seen, what are those, what's the significant barrier or barriers?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think picking up on Mike's point there about confidence and competence of students, you're actually encountering, it can be that you're encountering similar aspects within the academics and the examiners in terms of confidence in designing effective and authentic digital assessments that can be delivered by the Inspera platform or any other medium that they're delivered by. So having support for staff, for the academic teams, linked with the operational staff who are going to support the delivery of these, so that there are dialogues, and I think that's one of the things that's quite important, that dialogue, and perhaps starting with first adopters or sort of pilots can be really helpful. So I think that confidence and competence and developing skills in designing effective online assessment is quite important. And actually, I mean, in a way, COVID pushed so many of us into, including the University of London, into digital assessment very, very, very rapidly. And actually, we gave it a go, but looking back on it, it was amazing that we delivered 110,000 exams with everybody working in their kitchen around the world, students and staff everywhere, in that first May. But the reality is that wasn't perhaps our best delivery of assessment. We've got better, and we've built up those skills. I think another challenge that is worth noting is just that universities work on really quite long time scales. So an academic year, in order to make changes to an assessment, you sometimes need to make sure that you've thought about the contract you have with your students, in the sense of, we've said your assessment is going to be a 2-hour examination, and then instead we want to set an assessment where they build a pottery barn. We can't make that change in 1 year. We have to give them fair notice, because they've created an engagement with us that's a contract. So that really impacts that. And I think, for an organisation like the University of London, where we've got regular assessments happening, some of our programmes have four assessment cycles, it's quite difficult to get into that cycle, to make the changes and map that out. So I think it is about thinking about a reasonable time frame. You know, being realistic. You're not going to be able to make changes overnight. You're better off perhaps starting with a small number of programs or examinations that you or subject areas that you want to work with, and that support for the staff, both the operational staff and the examiners or the academic staff, I think is going to be essential to deliver.
I'm not entirely sure if I'd like to take all my law exams again or pottery. I'm not sure which would be better or worse.
Just
One thing to think about.
up on
But, yeah, picking up on that point, I think this is something that is actually taking two of those points together. COVID brought around a lot of rapid change, and how we make sure we harvest the best of that and improve upon it and don't go backwards is important. But equally, your point, Linda, about the timelines of realising how long effective change takes. And I think as I've the great privilege of speaking to educators around the world each year, there's a greater realisation of what that looks like in terms of when the effect of that change will be. And we work with institutions who've gone through very rapid change, some who've done it more slowly. I'd say London's on the rapid end. You digitise lots of exams in one go, and Michael and I are still here to tell the tale. Yeah. But I think that's a really key point, thinking about those timelines overall. Because I know the human condition is that we think of our own timeline and then perhaps forget the other people in the chain. So yeah, really, really important.
Yeah.
Now, Linda, you mentioned AI a little bit earlier on. I don't think it's possible to have a discussion about education these days without AI. And as I drafted this question, the lawyer in me didn't come out because it's an entirely leading question. The answer is one that everyone listening will scream at the screen as they hear it. But what I think it was more important is what comes from it. So the big leading question is, do you think the rise of digital tools and AI has changed how we define and ensure academic integrity? Yes. And if so, how? So let's look at the how. What is changing? How do we deal with it? And I know that is $1 million question that if we all had a perfect answer, that would be great. But Linda, from your perspective, how do we go about this?
How do we go about continuing to assure standards? Yes. And ensure that the what we are doing in assessment is providing an opportunity for students to demonstrate their learning? Then yes, there are real challenges, because Gen AI can be asked to write the answer to a question, and students could potentially submit that. So we're, like all universities, we're spending a lot of time having conversations about how we redesign our assessment to be more meaningful, but and more authentic and more secure in that circumstance. But I actually think it's also really, really exciting, because the world of work is being radically changed by AI. Across the globe, we're seeing the way in which AI is being integrated, some of it stealthily, some of it we don't realise the integration of AI into our home and work life, but in many places explicitly. Lawyers are using AI to draft contracts, but the real skill is the human skill of then reviewing that contract, of thinking carefully about how you communicate that contract to your client, for example. Those are the types of skills that we need to be tracking our assessment against. We need to be thinking about, in law, what is a lawyer really doing these days? How does it work? And how can AI tools help them? And when we're assessing, we need to be helping our students to prepare for the world of work that they might already be in, or the world of work that they go into. And digital assessment really does present some great opportunities, because back in the day when you just had a piece of paper and you had to kind of write down your answer, you're very limited in what you can do with your students. But now I think that the potential is quite exciting. So it's a considered approach, and it does tie back to, you know, some of the conversations we just had about, you know, competence and confidence of both students and staff. It also picks up on Mike's really important point about kind of digital divide and digital access. So who has access to the AI tools? Who has access to reliable broadband and reliable electricity? And that's a, you know, that is a genuine issue for our students. You know, many of our students are in countries that experience considerable environmental degradation or war and conflict, and they're you know, they're really challenged. So we need to make sure that what we're providing for our students is fair as well as accessible, and that needs to come into that. So I've answered a bit of that. You know, I don't actually have the complete answer.
No.
Because if I did, I would have sold it and I would be a multi-billionaire by now, because everybody's asking this question. But it's lovely to engage in this discussion.
Very much so. And you're right. If there was one answer, somebody would have solved it. But putting it out there, I'm not sure there is one answer. I think what we'll probably work towards is a framework that each of us can put into our context. I asked a group of academics last year who wants to deliver authentic assessments, and virtually it was a very loaded question, like set of questions, but who wants to deliver authentic assessments? Virtually every hand shot up. How many of you have used Gen AI in your day-to-day job in the last 12 months? Every hand stayed up. How many of you were happy to let students use Gen AI? And lots of hands went down. And it wasn't just being restrictive. Really, the conversation was, but I don't really know what it does properly yet. All I see is output. And I can understand that because we've gone through the curve of what is this? This is exciting. This can do lots of things. No, it's not great. Maybe it is. And us understanding it a bit better for our context is important. Mike, turning to you on this, you see it from a similar perspective in, you know, the close-knit world of assessment, but also from the world of work and what people are actually doing. What do you think we need to be doing or thinking about to make sure that we're embedding AI in the right way?
I think it's, for me actually, it's still, I mean, this is always an ongoing discussion and something we do with our students, we have done with our students, you know, before AI really crept into the conversation. It's hammering home that message about being good student, fundamentally, being accurate, being you know, not seeking the easy solution or the easy answer, or the, you know, let's be honest, the cheat when there's a more robust way of doing things that has integrity, you know, and it's driving that home still, and I don't think that message really changes for students. Yes, there's more tools to hand. I'm picking up what Linda said about the lawyers. I just heard something on the radio today about, I think there's a law firm that was banning its staff from using ChatGPT or whichever service they use, and it not because they want to exclude AI from their work. It's about accuracy, and that's what we really have to work with students on, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether it's a law firm or a student, AI isn't binary good, bad. It depends on the task. I mean, I mentioned Excel. I took great pride in the fact that I can write good Excel formulae. The fact is, ChatGPT can write them quicker and better than I can. And as long as I'm cognizant of the fact that if I don't put any of my data into that, I'm not exposing any of my data, I'm asking it to write me a formula, then that is quicker and better than me. And I'm happy to admit it. But that doesn't mean that it is universally good or universally bad. And I think we can explore this in the question that I'm asking everyone on the podcast this year, because I'm asking everyone and in some detail working towards a white paper towards the end of the year, which is, what do you see as the future of assessment, and what role does digital tools play in this future? And again, a nice broad question. So Linda, coming to you, I'll answer in the way that you wish on this one.
Sure. Well, you know, one of the things that we've been talking about already is the importance of assessment as learning. So we've talked about the way in which assessment can help students to develop skills and competencies that are relevant to their future. So I think continuing to think about assessment as learning and assessment for learning, rather than focusing on assessment of learning, which is perhaps sometimes linked to reproduction of knowledge rather than critical skills that you want graduates from university to have. I think that's one aspect that I would develop further is thinking about the principles. And Mike commented earlier, you know, that in a way this isn't new. We've always had challenges to the validity of assessment, whether that be getting somebody else to write your essay for you and submitting it, you know, essay mills. We've had lots and lots of challenges back through the ages. And so we're not necessarily in a different place here. It's just looking at it differently, I think. But I'm also really, really keen to think about some of the bigger questions that we might want to consider, which is, you know, do we need as many assessments as we do? Could we be looking at things like programmatic assessment rather than modular or small course? At the moment, we take a degree and we cut it into pieces, and we give one or two or even more assessments to each of those pieces. Is that the best way of approaching it? It's exhausting for everybody involved, the students, the administrators and the markers. It's a big industry. Could we look at different types of assessment? Could we be thinking about the overall skills, the overall application of knowledge across the whole of the degree, for example, capstone projects, etc. Those are some of those examples. Can we be using platforms like Inspera to really understand more about the learning needs of our students, so that they're taking small pieces of summative or formative? And I take your point you made earlier that if it's not assessed, students won't do it. Yes, that's a challenge, but how, you know, can we build that into the system? Can we use that to provide a more personalized learning experience for them? So we see that when they do an assessment, there's an area they need more help on, so we provide more help. It's more bespoke to that student. So can we use assessment as a much more integrated part of the learning, rather than put it at the end of the learning and expect them in 2 hours to be able to demonstrate all of the experiences that they've had across a whole year or across a whole module. So I'm you know, experimenting with these kind of ideas, and I think that the digital platforms and AI, which can help with that personalization, can really be helpful. I mean, if I might share just an example, I was just talking to a colleague from the University of London, one of our brilliant colleagues, who is always, his job title has got the word innovation in, which I think, and he lives and walks that. He was showing me an opportunity for an AI tutor to support a student in a role play, and you know, as a psychology, but it could be used in all sorts of different subjects. And it actually, you know, took the student through the role play, and then there was an intervention where the student wasn't necessarily as effectively as possible responding in this role play. So perhaps not asking the patient that they were seeing the right type of questions, and the AI kind of intervenes and talks to the student about how they might redevelop that. Now, in a way, that is an assessment, because that AI is assessing the student's engagement in this particular role play, and giving advice. It's a very quick and effective formative assessment that is really driving learning, and I find that sort of thing really exciting. To see that happening, to see AI providing the opportunity for that kind of integration of assessment with real learning, and meaningful and probably quite interesting for the student as well. I think it would be quite engaging for a lot of students. So again, this question of will they do it if it's not assessed? Well, in that circumstance they might, because they're getting review, they're getting feedback, and they're getting feedback very quickly.
Yes.
And if it's well written and the AI is working well, it can be really effective. And of course, recognise the point that the AI can produce pretty low quality output, but we can work on that. We can work with the AI bots the chat bots to improve the way in which they engage with the student to
Absolutely, they're
facilitate
only
their
going to
learning.
get better. And I agree, the integration of AI in assessment for learning perhaps overcomes that point of, well, it's not real. Well, it doesn't need to be. It's the feedback that's valuable here. And students' engagement with it in seeing how it's going to help them learn to the one that is real, which we might treat differently, is giving us the extra pair of hands, or 200 or 2,000 extra pairs of hands that we've all wanted. And I've thought about many applications in what I used to do. It's now about 6 years since I was a full-time lecturer, and I often think, what would I do with today's tools with what I was teaching? There's great opportunity there. Mike, turning to you on this, the future of assessment from an academic perspective, and also I think from that perspective of the fact that you have these 100,000 sits that happen on your watch. What is the future for us?
I think we're a fine balance. I will say this much. It's not, digital delivery of assessment is not easy. It's challenging. There are challenges to do it consistently everywhere around the world is hard. And there's always that danger, because as you go through the logic of it, and I've had conversations with colleagues where this happens, you think, oh, maybe it was just better when we had pen and paper and there was just less to go wrong. That the resisting falling back into those sort of practices, which, despite what everyone thinks, also had plenty of problems and things went wrong, by the way. It wasn't that straightforward either. So we're countering that. Actually, we're countering that by actually introducing some, there's some methods of assessment and locations of assessment that aren't going out of fashion, and actually we're seeing more students back in exam centres. I think year before last we had about 30% of our students in exam centres, 70% still at a location of their choice. Last year that had flipped on its head to about 70% in exam centres. It'll be a bit higher again this year, so we're definitely seeing that old style exam hall back in fashion again. So all of that is that, none of that is going anywhere. We'll see more of it, but it is just linking it up with the tech that we've got as well. And as Linda says, making the best use of that. One of the things we've always struggled with at a distance is delivering interesting assessment, I guess. We're historically it's you've studied, you've got to your end of year exam, it's a couple of hours, it's 3 hours, you write your answers, and actually we're still there a little bit, because doing anything else, bringing students from all over the world into small groups, for example, is really hard. If you get a lack of engagement by one or two students, the whole thing breaks down quite quickly. But you can definitely see a role for something like AI to be your study buddy or whatever it may be.
I think it's what I now think of as rose tinted varifocals, which is that we're very good at looking at the thing that came before and forgetting about its downsides. But with the thing that's straight in front of us, we can be very quick to look at what doesn't work. Because yes, I think operationalising, if we look at the problem, operationalising exams in 190 locations twice a year at the scale that you do, whether you do that on pen and paper or digitally, that's a big job and it's a hard job. And both of those are going to have pluses and minuses, whichever mode you pick. It's balancing those and working out whether the pluses are better on one or the other for you, and also beyond the person involved. So what are the sort of aggregated benefits across your institution? And it leads very nicely onto a question where you may actually revert back to some of what you've just said. But Mike, coming to you first, what lessons have you learned from integrating Inspera into, very tightly into the academic assessment journey of students at the University of London? And what advice would you give people who are starting or thinking of starting the same sort of process?
So when I think back to our first procurement exercise, which brought you on board, really at the top of everyone's worry list was, is this going to work every day? I don't mean that the tech doesn't work in the broader sense, but in all of these places and all of these time zones, is it going to work? Are there going to be bottlenecks when thousands of people try and submit something, which was a problem in the sort of immediate pandemic technology that we used? And so you're right. I mean, we said earlier we went big, didn't we? We suddenly launched this Inspera for a lot of exams quite quickly, and it did work. Students didn't have a huge amount of issues. There was no lag, there was no bottlenecks. The thing didn't break down, and it still hasn't actually. I'm still not aware. We're 3 or 4 years on, and I think of maybe 1 or 2 instances over, that lasted sort of half an hour of something not going quite right. But in our context, that's a breeze, really.
Yes.
And so day in, day out, it does work, and that's massively important to us. And if whatever the future holds, whatever technology we use, that will still be at the top of everyone's like, this must work.
Absolutely. Whether it's the student or the administrator or the academic, everyone should be focusing on the content of the exam itself, and everything else should just seamlessly be there in the background. And that's who we want to be, and we're happy that that's the way that it's working. Linda, same question to you. What lessons have you learned from integrating Inspera into the assessment journey at the University of London?
I think to some extent I'd go back to one of the questions you asked earlier, which is about academic integrity and assurance of standards. And I think that it's really important to recognise for our students, but indeed for students at every institution, our students want their degree to be recognised and valued, and they want to be able to say, I've got a University of London award on my wall, and that means something, and that their employers and their future employers and their children recognise the value of that. And the only way that we can maintain that is by continuing to have confidence that when we assess students, we are meaningfully assessing them. And the Inspera platform allows us to do that. Having a digital platform and some of the really interesting features that the platform has, like lockdown browsers, etc., add to that quality, so that when we're talking to the Bar Council in Pakistan, or when we're talking to a regulator in a South American country, we can say, this is what we do and this is how we do it. And we robustly know that that means that the students are the students we should be assessing, and we are assessing their work. And I think that fundamentally that's absolutely important. I think that we have opportunities to use your platform more effectively. I think that, you know, you as a platform, and, you know, not just your platform but other assessment platforms, have developed some fantastic tools and opportunities, both on the side of the way in which marking is done, the way the assessment itself is carried out, but also in terms of the design of the assessment, the exam, the design of that. And what I'm excited about is, in the future, working more with our academics and our program teams and our operational teams to do some more of the whiz bang stuff that you guys offer. And we don't do enough whiz bang at the moment. Excuse me. Partly because we've had to really focus on this assurance of standards, and that's been so fundamental to the mission of the university, because there is no point in recruiting students onto a degree which is then not going to be considered a valid degree in the future. So we need to keep that gold standard there. So, but it's a really exciting opportunity. And the thing with digital is that you can always make changes, you can always develop, and you can always work with colleagues who really want to try things out and to experiment. And I think that's that's very exciting. And as an organisation, my sense is Inspera are keen to play, and that's a good thing for us as well. But it's underpinned by kind of a quality robustness, and I think, as Mike pointed out, and he's there minute by minute, white knuckling 4,000 students taking one assessment around the globe, knowing that that is still a valid assessment, and that for the very, very vast majority of those students, they get absolutely to just focus on the, as you said, the exam that's in front of them, or the assessment that's in front of them, and not worry about the technology, which is quite a feat. Yeah,
and letting the students be confident again. We've spoken about their confidence of using the tech, but being confident in the exam that they're taking and the result they're going to get from it. You know, students assume, rightly or wrongly, that other students are cheating, are tricking the system, and so that their exam was secure gives them confidence that, you know, everyone else's exam was secure as well, and giving that confidence is one of the most important things I think we can do, because then everyone, you know, is well, they stop worrying about what the other person is doing and just focus on their own thing.
It's the assessment equivalent, I suppose, of herd immunity. It's knowing overall that we're on the same place. And Linda, I mean, what you say, that's the reason why my University of London degree certificate sits on my wall. I'm proud of it, and I know what it means, and I want other people to see what it means. Mainly my children coming into my office, but, you know, were there to be a visitor, they'd see it too. And in terms of what we can actually do, I mean, one of our most recent capabilities is assessment paths, which opens up the door to programmatic assessment, to e-portfolios, and I think excitingly too, to making assessments smaller and more bite-sized if we want to do that, but still assessing them or grading them as a whole. And it's a chance to deal with some of the things that we might have done before, but cause such administrative heartache or time, but we're letting the digital take the strain. So that's, real excitement there. And I know that continuing the dialogue on that will be really important. And depending on when you're listening to this, I'm either going to or have already been to the RIDE conference at the University of London, which is taking place in March 2025. I'm hoping people will listen to this for years to come, and they can hark back and reminisce to March 2025, which has still not happened at the time of recording. Let's turn to our final question, and again it may relate to things that you've already said. And Mike, I'll come to you first, and then Linda, to you. Could you share an example of where Inspera has transformed assessment practice, administrative process, but it's been part of that change for you? So Mike, you first, please.
I think I'm not looking at it broadly. It's just the flexibility it gives us. We do. I mean, Linda touched on this earlier. You know, we work with students studying in all sorts of diff- really difficult contexts. You know, actual war, actual disaster, and these things happen. I mean, I don't think there is an exam session where there isn't, you know, some sort of maybe political instability or something much more challenging, and we have to be able to change at a moment's notice. That may just be postponing the exam for a day or two, but it may be, you know, putting people who are in an exam centre online, you know, but we can do that now. There isn't really a problem, you know. Yes, there's a bit of work there, but you know, these things are possible, and the exams can still run. So that is a sort of a massive win for us every day, really.
Yeah, it sounds it. Thank you, Linda. Over to you.
Well, I think there are lots of examples, but one of them I think definitely sort of sticks in my mind is just the way in which Inspera has speeded up the distribution of assessment items. So there's the user, the student receiving their assessment, you know, kind of at a flick of a switch, there it is. But there's also, you know, once you've got the assessment, who's going to mark it? And, you know, prior to moving to online digital assessment, we had hundreds of thousands of exam scripts being transported around the world, physical exam scripts, you know, students' work flying around the world from you know, where their local centre was back to London and then distributed to the examiners, and we have an international cohort of examiners, so there was an awful lot of postage and time. All of that takes time, and now we are in a situation where we are digitally distributing large scales of assessment, you know, large volumes of assessment to our markers, and I think this is one of the areas I said where I think there's room for future development in terms of how we manage marking and assessment on the platform, and there are, you know, there are opportunities for us to be more efficient than we currently are, but it has certainly moved us forward, I think, quite substantially. So that's a real positive, and I think also in terms of accessibility, sort of building on what Mike suggested there, we know from evaluations, and we evaluate the summer assessments every year, and we've got a huge amount of data and several publications that kind of build on that. But we know, for example, that students with additional or particular or special needs around assessment can be accommodated well on the digital platform, and we saw that students, particularly a lot of students with additional needs, found moving to the digital platform for assessment really quite empowering, and we got a lot of very positive feedback from groups of students who felt that this was a space in which they could be more. It was a more equitable space for them, and I think that's good. And you know, it is, as Mike said, the flexibility that, you know, in the next few years there will be many changes, many dramatic changes to our world, and we hope to be able to work effectively to still support our students to demonstrate their learning.
Thank you very much. It's been a fascinating discussion. Mike, Linda, thanks for joining me. I've really enjoyed hearing more about what the University of London has done, and I say that as someone who's been involved in the project from the very start. It's about 4 years since Mike and I first met, so hearing how it's developed and continued has been of personal interest to me. Thank you also to our listeners for listening. If you found this useful, please like, subscribe and share via your preferred podcast platform, and a review is always welcome. Before we go, I mentioned I'm going to be at the RIDE conference at the University of London in March. I'm also going to be at conferences in Lancaster and Hong Kong and Spokane in Washington this year, amongst others. But Linda, Mike, Anything that you would like to plug while you're here before we go?
Well, we have a few publications from the work that Mike and I and other colleagues have done around exploring the experiences of stakeholders in their assessment, and we've also got a few publications around AI and assessment. So we can share some links with you if that would be useful to include in the podcast.
It would, and I'm sure our listeners would really enjoy those. So thank you again. Assessment in Focus is brought to you by Inspera, providing flexible assessment with integrity. I've been Ishan Kolhatkar. See you next time.